One of these films nearly killed its cast with a real train crash. Another was banned for saying too much about how war actually works. And one was so mean, even Martin Scorsese called it frightening. These are the 1960s war films Hollywood buried, downplayed, or straight up tried to forget. And yet they ended up being the greatest World War II movies of the decade. In 1944, a German colonel loads France's greatest paintings on a train to transport them to Germany. However, the French resistance is determined to prevent them from stealing their national treasure. Burt Lancaster didn't want art. He wanted explosions. The train started off as a thoughtful psychological war drama until Lancaster fired the original director, Arthur Penn, a few days into filming for making it too artistic. He brought in John Frankenheimer instead, told him to crank up the action, and the result was one of the most physically dangerous productions of the 1960s. They didn't use miniatures. They crashed real trains. No safety rigs, no green screen, just actual derailments and real explosions, filmed with full-size locomotives. The French Railway Authority even let them blow up part of a working rail yard with dynamite because they were planning construction anyway. Lancaster insisted on doing his own stunts at age 50 and injured his knee so badly they had to shut the whole production down for 2 weeks. He delayed surgery just to finish the movie. At one point, Frankenheimer and multiple crew members nearly got themselves killed during the shoot. He later admitted that he and Lancaster had basically gone off the deep end. They became obsessed with finishing the film no matter the risk. Still, the train flopped in the US, made $3 million domestic on a $6.7 million budget. But it did better overseas and eventually found a cult following in France. A US officer in a Japanese prisoner of war camp tries to raise money to buy his fellow prisoners' freedom. The whole movie is about class divides in a war camp. It's not just Allies versus the Japanese, it's Americans, Brits, and Australians stepping on each other to survive. King Rat isn't just underrated, it's practically buried. Based on James Clavell's own experience as a prisoner of war in a Japanese camp, the movie is blunt, uncomfortable, and way too honest for 1965. Naturally, it bombed. The cast wasn't just acting, some of them had actually been prisoners during the war. Denholm Elliott, who plays Lieutenant Colonel Larkin, had been shot down while serving in the Royal Air Force and spent years in a German camp. That level of authenticity bleeds into the film. The actors had to lose weight, shoot in extreme heat, and some of them ended up dangerously dehydrated just to make it believable. But the studio completely botched the marketing. They sold it like a traditional war movie when it was anything but. Director Brian Forbes later said that because of it, the film never had a chance. Whatever chance it had was thrown away by run-of-the-mill and basically dishonest exploitation. This was the last big-budget World War II movie shot in black and white. John Wayne plays a Navy officer demoted after Pearl Harbor, only to claw his way back to command and lead a major counteroffensive. George Kennedy, who later played Patton in Brass Target, was in this too. He'd actually served in World War II, won 2 Bronze Stars under Patton himself. You also get Henry Fonda in a small but key role. He was a World War II Navy veteran too, and only did this movie as a last-minute favor to Preminger. He showed up, did his scenes, and left. The film's realism comes through in how it stages combat. Ships in the Pacific at night, glass shattering during battle, it actually feels dangerous. Scorsese once said, "The way the final battle intrudes on the calm feels like it's invading your personal space." Wayne was diagnosed with lung cancer just after shooting wrapped. He kept it quiet, but at one point even suggested Kirk Douglas as a backup for the sons of Katie Elder in case he didn't survive the surgery. The film never caught on in the US. It wasn't the usual John Wayne crowd pleaser, and people didn't know what to do with it. But over time, it picked up a small cult following. A lot of people now think it's one of Wayne's best performances. This is one of the most ambitious war films ever made, and for once, the scale isn't just for show. The Longest Day covers the D-Day landings in Normandy, and nearly every character is based on someone who was actually there. The film was adapted from Cornelius Ryan's 1959 bestseller, which was based on first-hand interviews with soldiers and civilians from both sides. The production brought in actual military consultants, Allies and Axis, like General Günther Blumentritt, fighter ace Joseph Priller, and several others who were there on June 6, 1944. Even Erwin Rommel's wife was consulted. Producer Frank McCarthy hired 700 real soldiers for the background roles and used military historians to make sure every uniform, every unit, and every maneuver looked the way it actually happened. It took 3 directors, 4 assistant directors, and 5 screenwriters to get it all down. No one's trying to reinvent war movies here. They were just trying to get it right. John Wayne said he did it because he thought it was an important film. It ended up being his biggest box office hit, and not a Western. $50.1 million at the time, which today's dollars puts it around $525 million. For a 3-hour war epic with no CGI, that's not bad. Steve McQueen didn't even want to be in The Great Escape. Then he signed on, then demanded more screen time, then demanded a motorcycle chase. It wasn't in the script. They added it just for him. That scene ended up being the most famous part of the movie. The film is based on a real escape from a German prisoners of war camp, though the version on screen is heavily fictionalized. Still, some details are grounded in reality. Wally Floody, the original Tunnel King, worked full-time on the film as a technical advisor, and several cast members were actual prisoners during the war. It's one of those movies that keeps turning up on director lists. Tarantino loves it. He said it's one of the most entertaining movies ever made, and his favorite war film. When he made Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, he even inserted DiCaprio's character into one of McQueen's scenes as a kind of homage. The story follows a team of Allied saboteurs assigned an impossible mission: infiltrate an impregnable Nazi-held Greek island and destroy the 2 enormous long-range field guns that prevent the rescue of 2,000 trapped British soldiers. It's basically the blueprint for every modern action film where a ragtag crew takes on a suicide mission. Everything from Bond to Star Wars to Indiana Jones owes something to this movie. Gregory Peck hated the script. David Niven hated the director. Anthony Quinn tried to rewrite his part during filming. The production dragged out for months in Greece, and nobody was happy. And yet, somehow it turned into the biggest box office hit of 1961. It even won an Oscar for special effects. That's despite a few process shots that have aged about as well as powdered milk. Still, the pace holds up, and the final sequence still lands hard, even in 2025. The less said about its sequel, Force 10 from Navarone, the better. This one's one of Martin Scorsese's favorite war films. The Counterfeit Traitor is based on the real story of Erik Erikson, a Swedish oil executive who got blackmailed into spying for the Allies during World War II. William Holden plays him, and he's not doing the James Bond routine. He's a businessman stuck in a nightmare, constantly being watched and just trying to stay alive long enough to do his job and get out. The movie's based on Alexander Klein's 1958 book, and it sticks close to the real events. Erikson really did make dozens of trips into Nazi territory between 1941 and 1944, gathering intel on oil refineries. The Counterfeit Traitor film doesn't glamorize war espionage. It shows what it actually looked like: paranoia, danger, and no guarantee of making it home. And what makes it even more grounded is that they shot it in post-war Germany using real locations. You can see the rubble, the wreckage, all of it, still there. Michael Caine leads a team of British commandos disguised as Italians, sent deep into enemy territory in North Africa to blow up a German fuel depot. That's the basic setup, but this isn't a heroic war story. It's brutal, dirty, and full of characters who don't care about morals or redemption. There's no sentiment here. The commandos kill civilians without blinking. They don't weigh the consequences. They just pull the trigger and move on. Every move is about survival, and that's all that matters. People love to call it a mean knockoff of The Dirty Dozen, but that's lazy. This isn't a wannabe. It's a rough, low-key British production with its own voice. The nihilism, the cold efficiency. Scorsese said it best: the characters have no redeeming value, and that's what makes it work. Richard Burton leads a group of British agents on a mission to rescue a captured general from a Nazi mountain fortress. Clint Eastwood tags along as the token American, and from there the whole thing spirals into a chaotic mess of double crosses, fake identities, and more explosions than you'd expect from a spy film. Steven Spielberg even said it's his favorite war film of all time. Eastwood does most of his own stunts in this, including some crazy stuff on cable cars. He got paid $400,000. Burton got $1 million and was hammered through half the shoot. They barely spoke off camera. The whole thing was written in 6 weeks, and you can tell, but that's part of the charm. Critics at the time didn't love it, but it made $21 million off a $7 million budget. Still stands as Burton's last real box office hit in the US. And for a movie that's mostly wall-to-wall action with a convoluted plot that still confuses people today, it's held up surprisingly well. This is one of those forgotten UK-made World War II films that quietly slipped through the cracks. Lloyd Bridges stars as a Canadian officer leading a commando raid on a Nazi dockyard. The whole thing is more about tension and strategy than flashy explosions. It's based on a real operation, Operation Chariot, and even though it was made on a budget barely fit for TV, it's surprisingly solid. Producer Walter Mirisch kicked it off after the success of 633 Squadron, trying to crank out British war films with American leads that met Edie Levy rules and cost under $1 million. This was the first one, and depending on who you ask, probably the best. It's stiff, it's cheap, and yeah, the performances aren't exactly award material, but it's also based on a real raid where 622 British troops went in and 169 didn't come back. So, if you're into war history and can live with the VHS quality look, this one's worth a spin. Paul Newman doing a war comedy that tries to spoof his cool hand Luke persona, and it just doesn't land. This was Newman's first real shot at a full-on comedic lead, and the whole thing kind of falls apart around him. He plays an escape artist who gets promoted to general and parachuted into Italy to bust 5 captured brigadier generals out of a prisoners of war camp. Sounds fun on paper, but the jokes barely register, and the tone is all over the place. Newman's clearly trying to make the material work, but you can see him struggling through it. There's an interesting idea in there somewhere, but the execution just isn't there. Even Roger Ebert tore it apart. He said it looked like a movie made against its own will, and said it was so awkward and dull it seemed like even the actors were in pain. Probably the most polite way to call something a complete misfire. This is the blueprint. If you're doing a men on a mission war movie, this is where it starts. The Dirty Dozen came out in 1967 and rewrote the whole playbook. Lee Marvin leads a group of condemned soldiers, actual bottom feeders, and the army gives them one shot at redemption. Take on a suicide mission behind enemy lines. The cast is stacked. Charles Bronson, Jim Brown, John Cassavetes, Telly Savalas, Donald Sutherland, Ernest Borgnine. Tarantino even said the cast alone is why it deserves a spot on any all-time list. But the real legacy? Inglourious Basterds wouldn't exist without this film. Tarantino admitted he started writing Bastards thinking it'd be his Dirty Dozen. Of course, he veered off into his own world, but that's where the seed came from. And like Bastards, the Dirty Dozen is loosely inspired by real history, specifically a group called the Filthy 13. Critics at the time slammed the Dirty Dozen for glorifying violence. Didn't matter. The movie made $45 million off a $5 million budget and kicked off an entire wave of knockoffs. Give me an American for 36 hours and I'll give you back a traitor. That's the tagline, and it's the whole setup. George Seaton writes and directs this one, proving his 2 writing Oscars weren't for nothing. This time, James Garner plays an American major who gets kidnapped by the Germans right before D-Day. The plan is simple: trick him into thinking the war is over and convince him to spill everything he knows about the Allied invasion. Rod Taylor plays the Nazi psychologist running the whole show, and he's great in it. Slick, calm, completely unnerving. Garner, meanwhile, plays it straight. Not flashy, but solid. The film's in black and white, which was already rare in the Technicolor-hungry 60s, and that stripped-down look gives it a cold documentary feel that works for the story. It runs a bit long, 115 minutes, but never drags. You already know how it ends, but the tension holds. It's lean, efficient, and tightly plotted. No melodrama, no forced emotion. just a good wartime thriller that respects its audience. This isn't a battle movie. No D-Day landings, no tanks, no explosions. What the Hill gives you is something grimmer. A psychological war between prisoners and their jailers inside a British military prison in the Sahara. Sean Connery took this role specifically to get as far away from James Bond as possible. He plays Joe Roberts, a soldier locked up for refusing to send his men into a suicidal fight. He's stuck in a cell with a handful of other court-martialed misfits, and they're all at the mercy of a sadistic sergeant major who runs the place like his own personal war zone. The hill in the title is exactly that, a brutal incline in the desert they're forced to climb over and over with full gear in the heat as punishment. Things go south fast when one of the prisoners is pushed too far and dies, and the power struggle between inmates and officers hits a boiling point. The film didn't do much at the box office, but critics got it. Ray Rigby's screenplay won at Cannes. Woody Allen called it one of the greatest American films ever made. And Sean Connery, despite the film's lack of commercial success, considered it a personal triumph as it led to more challenging acting roles in the future.